Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. I'll be joined in the second half of the show by Harriet Williamson. Coming up tonight, tens of thousands of people, over 100,000 clearly, people joined Tommy Robinson's Unite the Kingdom protests over the weekend. What was the nature of them? What should we do about it? It's pretty scary. I was quite shocked seeing that footage over the weekend. In Westminster News, Danny Kruger says the Tory party is over as he defects to reform. And Keir Starmer really does seem on the ropes. One of his key aides has resigned after really horrific emails about Diane Abbott were revealed. And obviously his judgment over, I was going to say his judgment over Jeffrey Epstein, but of course his judgment was more over Peter Mandelson. Has come into question. Let's get straight into that first story after I ask you to support us if you enjoy what you're watching at novaramedia.com/support, and make sure to let us know your comments in the YouTube chat. Tens of thousands of people from all over the country came to London on Saturday to attend the Unite the Kingdom rally. It was huge, certainly the largest demonstration organised by the far right in decades, with police estimating between 110 and 150,000 in attendance. Obviously, the organisers saying much more than that. Before the crowd had even set off towards Whitehall for the rally, the mass of people carrying Union Jacks and St George's flags stretched for half a mile from Waterloo Bridge to Blackfriars Bridge. Billed as a festival of free speech, the demonstration was organised by far-right activist and convicted criminal Stephen Yaxley Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson. As they marched, the crowds chanted his name as well as "We want our country back," and Keir Starmer is an insert expletive there. Now, Tommy Robinson has been complaining about the demonstration being described as far-right.
They managed to silence us for 20 years with labels. Racist, Islamophobe, far-right. They don't work anymore. The dam has well and truly burst. The cat is out of the bag and there is no putting it back in. The silent majority will be silent no longer.
But does he have a point? Well, these were some of the speeches from the rally, and we'll let you decide.
It's Jesus Christ versus Satan. Christianity versus the rest. Islam, Hinduism, Baha'i, Buddhism, and whatever else you're into are all false religions. We've got to clean our countries up. We've got to get everything out that does not know or receive Jesus Christ. Ban any type of public expression in our Christian nations from other religions. Ban halal, ban burqas, ban mosques, ban temples, ban shrines.
Let's not beat around the bush here. We are witnessing the rape, replacement, and murder of our people. Change is possible. Remigration is possible, and it is up to us to make it happen. We are Generation Remigration.
Nous sommes, vous et nous, soumis au même processus de grand remplacement de nos peuples européens par des peuples venus du Sud et de culture musulmane. Vous et nous sommes colonisés par nos anciennes colonies.
We are both subject to the same process of the great replacement of our European peoples by peoples coming from the South and of Muslim culture. You and we are being colonized by our former colonies.
Now, as we're going to discuss on the show, obviously, there's lots of, confusion, ambiguity, uncertainty about whether or not all of the more than 100,000 people attending that protest agreed with everything said on the stage. But the fact that many people did attend a protest with those people making those statements on that stage, I think is terrifying. Ban all religious expression other than Christianity. Remigration, I'm sure most of you sort of are familiar with the term now. But what remigration essentially refers to is deporting people who aren't illegal immigrants, but deporting people essentially because they're not white, because they have some immigrant background. Obviously, it's a misnomer to say they could be deported because they're from Britain, but what they're saying is to send non-white people back to where their ancestry is from. So really extreme fascist stuff. I'm also scheduled to speak were former Donald Trump advisor Steve Bannon and psychologist Jordan Peterson. Can't believe we're calling him a psychologist. He's an influencer, though neither showed up. Ex-owner Elon Musk did make an appearance, though, speaking to the crowd via video link.
The left is the party of murder and celebrating murder. I mean, let that sink in for a minute. That's who we're dealing with here. That is who we're dealing with. If this continues, that violence is going to come to you. You will have no choice. You're in a fundamental situation here where whether you choose violence or not, violence is coming to you. You either fight back or you die. You either fight back or you die.
I mean, you either fight back or... Elon Musk is clearly the most dangerous person in the world right now. You either fight... He's literally calling for civil war. That is an incitement to violence. Either you fight back or you die, right? And obviously, as we've said, as we did a whole section on Friday, the killing of Charlie Kirk was terrible. Political violence is immoral and also backfires. But the idea, I mean, that is incitement to violence. I mean, he's trying to provoke a civil war, and actually his platform is full of and constantly boosting people who want some kind of race war, essentially. In that speech, Musk also called for a new government as quickly as possible. I'm saying there's got to be a dissolution of parliament. I don't think he really understands how our politics works. As I say, questions about whether or not those extreme views were representative of everyone on the demonstration. One high-profile journalist who thinks they weren't representative was Sky's Trevor Phillips.
I think that for those who oppose Robinson and his ilk, the most alarming aspect of the event was just how normal the vast majority of the marches were. I spent an hour or two amongst them, and my own impression was that they were mostly the sort of people you'd meet in a country pub or in half-time queue for the loo at football or at a concert. There was a sprinkling of black and brown faces, and the event was brought to a close by a gospel group singing Jerusalem. All that must worry the traditional mass parties, Labour and Conservatives, now polling at less than 40% between them. They're draining support to parties like Reform and the Greens. And yet, a man recently out of jail, condemned as an extremist thug by most mainstream media outlets, can rally a demo the size of the entire population of Cambridge or Blackpool. A feat you couldn't imagine either Sir Keir Starmer or Kemi Badenoch pulling off anytime soon. Perhaps the people are sending us all a message. Let's see if anyone at Westminster's listening.
It's a slightly odd thing to say because, in this country, we don't have a tradition of party leaders ever bringing out people to a protest. But I suppose the more significant thing he said is there'd be people you'd see in a country pub or at a half-time football match. And obviously people in a country pub or at a football match can be fascists. Right? It doesn't really preclude the idea that they could be extremists. The point about the gospel group is interesting. There were black singers on the stage. So at the same time that you've got one speaker calling for remigration, which is essentially a call for non-white people to be kicked out of the country, whatever citizenship they have, wherever they're born, you have black people singing on stage. So I suppose that speaks to the incoherence of the movement, perhaps. Reuters spoke to some of those attending the rally.
They need to stop illegal migration into this country. It's tearing us apart. We've got people here, the veterans, our veterans that fought for us and for our freedom, lying on the streets with nowhere to go. But you pop in, get rid of your documents, and you can have a 4-star hotel, free board and lodge.
I think the current government is a disgrace. It's taking away our liberties and making up things as they go along. I've never seen a government so disorganised.
They were expressing views which are clearly widespread in the country, whether or not you agree with them. Others in attendance, though, were clearly much more extreme.
Keir Starmer needs to be assassinated. Yeah, someone needs to shoot. Someone needs to shoot Keir Starmer.
Now, obviously, that's one guy, but you also at that demo had Elon Musk saying it's either kill or be killed, essentially. So what's the distance from that to someone saying Keir Starmer needs to be assassinated? Of course, at the same time as Tommy Robinson's rally, a counter-protest was taking place. The Stand Up to Racism demonstration saw around 5,000 people take part, and with the crowd making their way to Whitehall to protest the far-right rally. Amongst them was suspended Labour MP Diane Abbott, who told Sky why she was there.
It's very important to stand up to fascism. We need to be in solidarity with asylum seekers, and we need to show that we are united.
And you said this is about women's safety and girls. Obviously, the other side say this is about that issue for them too. What's your response?
They're talking nonsense. That's my response. They're talking nonsense, and it's a dangerous lie to try and say that men of colour are a threat to women. It's a very dangerous lie, and I think we need to squash it.
Police had set up barriers on Whitehall to separate the Unite the Kingdom protesters from those with Stand Up to Racism, and that's where there were violent flashpoints. So in the afternoon, Robinson supporters tried to break through police lines, separating them from the anti-racist protesters. The Met used horses to force the angrier elements in the crowd back. There was also a moment when the Stand Up to Racism protesters found themselves surrounded by Unite the Kingdom supporters. Ben Jamal of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign gave Novara Media this report from inside the kettle.
We've had an extraordinary situation now for about 3 hours. Effectively, the police have allowed or said that they were incapable of stopping the fascists from surrounding every exit out of Whitehall. They blocked off Whitehall Place, Horse Guards Avenue, the south end of Whitehall, and if you can see in the camera in the distance, there are thousands of fascists who are also occupying Trafalgar Square and have tried to march down Whitehall. So effectively, several thousand anti-racist demonstrators have been tackled by the fascists in Whitehall for the past 2 or 3 hours.
The Met Police eventually managed to create a safe route for those counter-protesters to exit unharmed. Some of the police weren't so lucky. So in a statement after the event, police said, quote, a number of those who were part of the Unite the Kingdom protest and became involved in disorder in multiple locations. And when they went on to report this, there is no doubt that many came to exercise their lawful right to protest, but there were many who came intent on violence. They confronted officers engaging in physical and verbal abuse and making a determined effort to breach cordons in place to keep everyone safe. The violence they faced was wholly unacceptable. 26 officers were injured, including 4 seriously, among them broken teeth, a possible broken nose, a concussion, a prolapsed disc, and a head injury. To get a better sense of the nature of Saturday's Unite the Kingdom demonstration, earlier today I spoke to Georgie from Hope Not Hate, which is an organisation that monitors the far right in Britain. And I began by asking her whether she was surprised by the number of people in attendance.
Unfortunately, I don't think we're necessarily surprised by the size, although what I think is really interesting is the way that far right are trying to make it sound like it's far bigger. So they're talking, the sizes of 3 million, which would make it bigger than the Iraq war protests. And it's simply not true. It's probably somewhere closer to 110, 150,000 people. And that's what the Met Police have said. But no, not necessarily surprised. I think you can see from the asylum seeker hotel protests over the summer that this has been growing. And Tommy Robinson has been mobilising for this for 6 months, maybe. So unfortunately, not shocking.
Yeah, so I suppose the reason I ask is because I was surprised, sort of seeing that aerial footage, especially. I'm used to sort of far right demos looking like, 100 or so guys drinking beers, sort of very yobbish. This was an enormous demonstration, right? It wasn't 3 million like what Tommy Robinson said, but it seemed to me like a real step change in terms of how many people Britain's far right can mobilise.
Definitely, and I think it's because they've widened out their appeal. Like the message of the protest itself, Unite the Kingdom. Obviously, they did anything but unite the kingdom. It was all about division and hate. But they've broadened out their message and they've made it kind of so specific that people can feel like they can kind of latch onto it. And that idea of the flag, that's what I saw from the aerial footage. It's just an extraordinary amount of kind of Union Jacks and St. George's flags. And that felt like what people were kind of uniting around in itself.
What's your understanding of how it was organised? I mean, was this just Tommy Robinson's followers on social media, or is there a sort of more organised network that managed to mobilise this many people?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question. I mean, Tommy Robinson has loads of experience of organising these with his kind of left-hand man, Danny Tomo, and they've been doing it for a while. In fact, they had one last year that was significantly smaller, where he played a film for something like 2 hours, a pretty boring protest in itself. But you'll see different networks of people. And I think that's reflective of what the far right is like now. In the past, you'd have to be a card-carrying member of the EDL or the BF or the NF or whatever. And now it's kind of this network. They kind of move like a school of fish, especially the kind of content creators who exist around it. They're all kind of feeding this and they all want it to be a success. So whilst you might not be a member of Tommy Robinson's political movement, you're kind of part of an ecosystem. And I think that's what builds it. And I think you'll have seen a lot of people off the back of the protests this summer building towards this as well. So I think he's got some momentum behind him.
In terms of sort of what the speakers were saying and the themes represented, something that seemed a bit new to me was the sort of prevalence of Christian messaging. I think probably evangelical Christians sort of both speaking. There was a gospel choir. I mean, what's going on there? Is this new, sort of the extent to which Britain's far right is leaning into Christianity?
Yeah, it's been a growing theme over the last few years, and you'll see reverends and priests and others turn up. And I think part of it is the far right trying to latch onto what is this threat that they talk about. And so when they can talk about it being a threat to religion, a threat to culture, a threat to the flag, it becomes something more real that they can point to, even though it's been manufactured. So you had people talking about religious wars, you had people talking about banning mosques, there was burning of flags, including the Palestinian flag. And I think it's a way for them to latch onto what exactly are they talking about, which is separate to race. Although it is obviously racist, it makes it harder to pin onto them. I also think it fits with their kind of family values. You know, they have ideas about what they think a family looks like, what men and women look like, their roles in society, that really lean into Christianity in itself and kind of the more extreme kind of, yeah, as you say, kind of fundamentalist side of it. So in a growing trend, and it does really feel like it's been kind of brought in from the US. I think what we're seeing is those movements looking more and more similar as each passing day goes by. So definitely an interesting and an evolving theme for the far right.
From looking at the speeches, I mean, from knowing the people who organise this, it's very clear to say that these are far right people, sort of in the most traditional sense of the word. There's obviously now a big debate, considering how large this demonstration was, about how to categorise all of the attendees. Are there 150,000 militant far right activists in the UK and they all attended? Or, you know, are some of these people more wavering, who might just be patriotic and, you know, don't necessarily agree with all the details of what Tommy Robinson or his guests say? I mean, what's your understanding of that?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's so hard to pinpoint exactly who these people are and what they believe. And I think part of it is that, you know, as I was saying earlier around the claim that 3 million people were at this protest, that simply isn't true. Tommy Robinson can also say, I'm not far right, I'm just plain speaking. And some people will believe that's true. He has a way of kind of moderating and trying to hold back what it really is. I think if you're going to a Tommy Robinson demonstration, you probably are on the more extreme end, but there may be some people there who are going to that protest maybe because they like Tommy Robinson personally, or because there's a particular issue that they're passionate about. But these are going to be some of the most dedicated to the cause. I think where that differs is maybe to local protests that we've seen around asylum seeker accommodation, where the far right are really successful at co-opting local issues, whether that's sexual assaults in an area, whether that's the closing of a hotel that was a business. I think that's where there's tons of nuance as to, is this person a far right activist, or is this somebody who is susceptible to the far right's messages? Whereas actually, I think for the majority of the people at the demonstration this Saturday, they probably were on the much more extreme end.
And I suppose finally, just a question about Hope Not Hate, your organisation. I mean, what do you, I suppose, because everyone's now having a conversation about how do we respond to this? This is a much bigger demonstration than most people were expecting. There's a sort of sense that something must be done. Your organisation sort of sets itself out as monitoring the far right and I suppose campaigning against them. What do you see as your role in sort of countering them? What's your sort of analysis of how one should respond to 150,000 people turning up to a Tommy Robinson rally?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult because I don't think you can take apart the growing support for Reform UK and the growing support for Tommy Robinson. They might be different parts of that kind of ecosystem, but they come hand in hand with each other. And so I think some of our job is about how you respond, especially at a local level when we see these kind of asylum seeker protests and we see the kind of on the street racism and hatred, is trying to counter that in communities, doing that kind of work to bring people together, because often these are communities that just simply don't talk to each other and don't understand each other. But I also think it's making the case kind of politically. We put out some polling late last night, which shows that actually the thing that most people are passionate about isn't changing the immigration system. It's about addressing economic insecurity. And I think making that case has got to be part of anybody, wherever you kind of do your anti-fascism, however your anti-fascism kind of expresses itself. I think part of the work is politically making the case that we need widespread kind of change in order to defeat the far right. If we can't beat them on the messages, if they can constantly sow fear into communities and blame asylum seekers and migrants, we need to show what actual radical economic change looks like that would meet the material needs of those people in reality.
That was Georgie Laming from Hope Not Hate speaking to me earlier today. Labour's response to the far-right protest was pretty muted. Peter Carr was sent out on the Sunday morning media round.
Peter Carr, there were 150,000 people on a demonstration in London yesterday, organised by Tommy Robinson, who's just recently left jail. Does that disturb you?
It doesn't disturb me because it's actually proof that we live in a country where free speech, free association is alive and well. The bit that disturbs me is that when a minority go to an extreme and end up perpetrating violence against the police, that is unacceptable, and those people should and will pay a price for it.
Now, that is a really, really pathetic response, I think. So we showed you some of the clips of people speaking at that demonstration, right? There were people calling for remigration, so deporting anyone who's not white. People might give you sort of slightly different definitions of it, but the idea is it's not about whether you're a citizen or a legal immigrant. They want to deport citizens. Or expel citizens, I suppose, because you can't really deport a citizen. People saying no religion should be allowed to be practiced other than Christianity. Like, Labour are worried about offending people. Now, how many people? These are issues where there is a super majority of people that think these are crazy, horrible, horrific ideas, and all he can say is, "Oh well, I think the scuffles with the police were bad," right? Do you not have anything politically to say about what kind of politics these people, knowingly or not, maybe lots of them are just sort of ordinary people who feel patriotic, who feel a bit sort of disenchanted from the establishment. But by turning up to that and listening to those speeches, right, if they didn't know that that's what was being said on the stage, maybe it would be useful for Peter Carr to show some political leadership and point out the actual nature of that demonstration, instead of just saying, oh, it's good that people have freedom of speech and as long as they don't commit crimes. Like, you're a politician. You should be able to speak politically. You're not like a civil servant. If you're a civil servant, you're supposed to just, or the chief of the police, for example, you're supposed to just talk about what's legal and what's illegal. If you're a politician, you're allowed to say, this message was racist and therefore we're against it. I imagine there was some kind of pressure on Keir Starmer because, so many people saw this demonstration and thought it was very scary and that the response from the party had been completely pathetic. So there was a slight upgrade in the message. So at 2 p.m, Keir Starmer tweeted, "People have a right to peaceful protest. It is core to our country's values, but we will not stand for assaults on police officers doing their job or for people feeling intimidated on our streets because of their background or the colour of their skin. Britain is a nation proudly built on tolerance, diversity and respect. Our flag represents our diverse country, and we will never surrender it to those that use it as a symbol of violence, fear, and division. So finally, some anti-racism introduced, although again, only in tweet form. Keir Starmer has had more than a year now to sort of point out that this is actually a political issue and racism is bad. I'm joined by journalist and broadcaster Sangita Myska to discuss the politics of this. But I'll begin actually, Sangita, by asking you about the counter-demonstration, because you were on it. What was your day like on Saturday?
Thank you for having me on, first of all, Michael. Thanks for the invitation. It's good to be here. It's interesting, actually. I had just come back from a trip to the occupied West Bank, where I was on a fact-finding mission. And all the time that I was there, I was seeing firsthand what it means for Palestinians to live under an extreme far-right government that wants an ethno-nationalist state. I arrived back on the Thursday, and on the Friday morning, I discovered that Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who is a literal far-right activist whose ideology is entirely based on racism at its core, is attempting to rally people in central London. So the first thing I did was ask around with friends, worked out that Stand Up to Racism was going to be holding a counter-demonstration. And I'd already heard in the background that there was now going to be a women's bloc. And I think this was a really important step forward, because what we know about women and peace movements particularly is that women have very often been at the forefront of that. So I decided to turn up at the counter-demonstration and walked with that block of women. And it's important to describe who was there. The vast majority of the people there were white women. And when I started talking to the women there as to why they had arrived, they said, look, what we want to do is counter what Robinson has done very effectively, which is weaponize the narrative that he and his goons are here to protect us, to protect white women from non-white men, and principally men that are coming over in small boats as asylum seekers. So that was kind of the block that I was walking with. Everything was fine. We walked along from Russell Square down through the Strand. We then eventually turn up past Trafalgar Square and end up in Whitehall, which is where the designated end point was, to hear a few speeches. When we got there, I decided to walk up to the furthest barrier that I could get to, which, had I been able to carry on walking, would have eventually led me to Parliament Square. I couldn't do that because the police had created what they called a sterile zone. And that's what the Metropolitan Police and other police forces will do in order to keep opposing sides of demonstrators apart. What happened was that it appears to me that the police were completely taken aback by the large number of Tommy Robinson supporters that were there. And some of them ended up spilling over into a side street called Whitehall Place. So essentially, they were more or less in spitting distance of where we were. There were a row of police vans, and at one point, so this was about 2:40 to 2:45 in the afternoon, violence started erupting. So people these are Robinson supporters, who are on Whitehall Place, started pelting police officers, and they were trying to break through the barriers. The police went to their police vans, they took out their riot gear, riot shields, batons, headgear, and they started pushing them back. So this is now quite early on in the afternoon. I hung around chatting to other people who are counter-demonstrators. We heard a couple of speeches. And then by about 4:30-ish, I think, we decided to sort of make our way out of Whitehall on the way home. I asked one of the stewards how we could do that, and he said, just walk straight back up towards Trafalgar Square. As we did that, we noticed there were very thin lines of police who were essentially acting as a wall, but a very thin wall, in the counter-demonstrators. And the odd Tommy Robinson supporter had begun to filter through from Trafalgar Square down into Whitehall. So we continued to walk up and noticed larger and larger numbers of people who were wrapped in flags, many of whom looked completely off their heads, started running down through the gaps in the police lines, all the way down towards the counter-demonstrators. As we walked up, we arrive at Trafalgar Square to see literally a sea of people who are covered in George crosses, who are jeering and shouting. And very quickly, it was obvious that the police were scrambling to try and find a way to build a cordon or re-establish a cordon between the counter-demonstrators and Tommy Robinson's supporters. We're not talking about half a dozen people on the fringe of the Tommy Robinson demonstration. We're now talking about hundreds and hundreds of people filtering down from the Strand and flooding Trafalgar Square. So I managed to do a bit of filming, which I then put on my social media stuff. And you can see police scrambling to try and find a way of re-establishing order. After about three minutes after I finished filming, because I realized we had to just get out of there, and it was chaotic, Michael. It was absolutely chaotic by this stage. I realized that police mounted on horses had managed to make their way to the top of Whitehall to try and fight back what were a bunch of racists from trying to get to the counter-demonstrators. The suggestion that this was, by Peter Kyle, that this was simply a bunch of anodyne free speech activists who are coming over to have a cup of tea and a chat with people who are significantly smaller in number at this counter-demonstration is utterly, utterly ridiculous. The only reason they had decided to make their way down to see the counter-demonstrators would logically be to try and attack them.
I suppose I'm wondering where we go from here, because, you know, it's been the standard sort of tactic of the left when there is a far-right demonstration to organise a counter-demonstration. And normally, you know, I've been on some in the past, and normally the assumption is that there'll be more of you. You know, normally the idea is the far-right might be sort of aggressive and they might have this sort of strange militant organisation, but it's the left who, or the anti-racists who will be sort of larger in number. And that gives you a sort of security and confidence, because you feel like, well, you know, they might be violent and scary, but as long as we stay together, we will be bigger than them. When I sort of heard there's 150,000 people, and I would say at least, like some of those aerial sort of films, and then 5,000 anti-racist protesters, that sounded terrifying to me. And I suppose, what do we do a change of, because it's a difficult ask, isn't it? If Tommy Robinson organises another demonstration of this many people, do we say, well, we'll get more than 150,000? Because otherwise you're sort of inviting people to go to quite a dangerous situation. I suppose I'm a bit at a loss to work out what to do. Maybe the anti-racists should have a protest on a different day. What do you think, sort of having attended that protest on Saturday?
So I think the police had a very difficult job on their hands. There were 4 home games. They had managed to recruit, I think, about 500 police officers from other forces to try and backfill what was going to be an already overstretched Metropolitan Police. I think the police have a lot to learn from last weekend. It started out fine, and for the majority of the day, we were kept well apart. I think what was very clear is that, as you say, nobody was expecting between 100,000 and potentially 150,000. I don't know whether that higher figure is entirely accurate. Pro-Tommy Robinson demonstrators to turn up. And I think the police were overwhelmed, and they didn't have particularly good intelligence, and they should have thought more about protecting essentially what was our flank. I have very mixed feelings about this. I think the reason I turned up is because I'm old enough to remember, as a child, the late 1970s, the 80s, and into the 90s. So that was the period where we had the National Front, we had the BNP, we had the EDL, we had eventually Combat 18, which were a very nasty bunch of violent racists. And I realised from looking back at that time, that it's really, really important that we make sure that when the television cameras are rolling, we are able in large numbers to demonstrate that Tommy Robinson and his crew are a large but vociferous minority. I do not think that they represent the great British public. What we know about the people that turned up to Robinson's event is this: not every single one of them would have been a racist, but every single racist in the country is very likely to have attempted to turn up to Tommy Robinson's rally on Saturday. So I think it's really important that we don't sleepwalk our way into allowing the far right to get the upper hand in the narrative. And the narrative that they're currently pushing is, one, they represent the working class of Great Britain, which they don't. Number two, that they care about violence against women and girls. If they did, Michael, they would be kicking up a massive fuss about the fact that 2 women are killed every single week by their partners. You will not find Tommy Robinson ever mentioning that anywhere. Neither will you find him showing his outrage at what is currently under investigation by West Midlands Police, which is a racially aggravated rape against a Sikh Indian woman. There has been complete silence on this matter. Absolutely no one in their right minds thinks that the grooming gangs who raped and trafficked young girls for far too many years was a good thing. But what we do know about that situation was that there was a fundamental breakdown between social services, the police, and people who were trying to raise the alarm. We all know that was bad. We are all united in that. Robinson, the third narrative he's managed to very successfully weaponize, as we know, is that asylum seekers coming across in small boats, these people account for 4% of overall migration into the country. That 4% is responsible for 99% of the deeply entrenched structural long-term problems we have in this country, like a struggling NHS, a lack of housing, a lack of resources and school places for parents who want to get their kids into good schools. We've got to be able to turn the tide, Michael. And part of that is going to have to be us coming out in greater numbers saying this is not Robinson's version of what Britain is not accurate and it is not representative. To answer your question about having a rally on a separate day, it's interesting you mentioned this. In the last 24 hours, I've been contacted by a range of people, including some groups who are saying, actually, perhaps we do need to come out and have a counter demonstration, not on a day where, or just a demonstration, not on a day where Tommy Robinson is creating a rally, in order that we can put forward our vision of a more united Britain, which is patently aware that we have deep structural problems, not least an economy that is failing to grow at the moment, but that actually we believe that our success is built on diversity and unity, and principally democracy.
I mean, how big a problem do you think it's a loaded question, isn't it? But just the lack of political leadership essentially on this question, where Keir Starmer has been completely unwilling, other than, one tweet yesterday, sort of after 24 hours, but he's had a year. He's very unwilling to call anything racist and talk about how we should stand against ethno-nationalism, for example. Do you think that that's causing a real problem in terms of sort of mobilizing against this? Because it just seems like, okay, the moment now is for the far right. The best thing for everyone else to do is just to sort of stand back and wait until the momentum comes back to the left. I feel like there is something of that in the air at the moment. And I think that is because there's a vacuum of leadership. But I want to hear your opinions on that.
I completely agree with you. There is a vacuum of leadership. I'm really confused by Keir Starmer's reticence. It's an interesting thing because I don't think Keir Starmer is somebody who has particularly well thought out political principles. But one would hope that somebody who was formerly the Director of Public Prosecutions in this country would understand very clearly what criminality is. What we know is that Tommy Robinson is, in fact, a convicted criminal. We also know that what we were hearing from Elon Musk was, in my view at least, incitement to violence. He was literally saying you need the dissolution of Parliament and that war is coming to you. That, if anything, I would think, were the kind of words that should send shock through Keir Starmer's spine. So it's really weird that he issued essentially what seems to be a tweet in which he says, well, it's all kind of free speech, but don't worry about it because, we are going to deal with the people that attack the police officers, but we're going to let everything else go. I don't really understand what he's doing here. If I'm feeling very generous about it, it might be that he was distracted by the fact that he had appointed Mandelson to become ambassador to Washington. And that, of course, has all ended in tears as we realized that he had befriended a prolific paedophile. I think there may be something else going on as well, which is that, I don't know if you remember this, the Shawcross Review, I think it was 2023 or 2024, was instituted to try and have a look at how effective the government's PREVENT scheme was. So this was the de-radicalisation programme that the government has ploughed lots and lots and lots of money into. Successive administrations have done that. And what William Shawcross concludes in that review is that actually, in his opinion, there has been far too much concentration on the rise of the far right. Now, I'm very much hoping that William Shawcross is today eating his words, because I think the result of his conclusion was that government spending reduced and actually PREVENT started looking away from what we knew was a rapidly rising number of young men who were being attracted to the far right. They take their eye off the board, and as a result, the government stops being particularly interested in it. What we saw on Saturday was the culmination, I would argue, probably of that. Richard Bergen said it best, the Labour MP said it best, I think, this morning, when he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if we end up at the next general election with what looks like and sounds like a far-right government, all the other problems we have in this country, like a crumbling NHS, like a lack of housing, is literally going to fall by the wayside. We need to get a handle on this. Ed Davey's idea of having a range of political leaders come out and condemn what is happening is a really important gesture. I think it would draw a line in the sand. It would say Tommy Robinson is operating well outside the sphere of reasonable political debate. At the core of Robinson's philosophy is race theory. These people literally believe that white people in this country are being replaced, and that there's some great plan to do it by ethnic minorities and principally brown and black people. You said it yourself. It was a brilliant summary by you. They believe in re-immigration. They believe in banning all religions except Christianity. This is a relatively new thing and an idea that's essentially come across from American evangelical churches. As we've been discussing, we hear Elon Musk essentially talking about overthrowing democracy. How much more is it going to take before this Labour government understands that this is not an issue they can stick on the back burner? This is an urgent matter, and it cannot be left just to civil society. I don't know if you saw this tweet from Brendan Cox today. His wife, of course, the MP Jo Cox, Labour MP, who was murdered by a man who shouted "Britain First," which is a right-wing, an extremist right-wing organisation, just before he killed her, saying, if you have ideas, if you want to create a movement that's going to counter the narrative from Tommy Robinson, contact me. It should not be left to the widow of Jo Cox to be thinking about how to strategize to try and reclaim the narrative, Michael. Something is going very, very wrong if it's only left to civil society. This needs to be a non-partisan government response. We have to understand this is not about politics. This is about human rights and stopping the rise of fascism and extremism in the UK.
Which everyone seems to want to pretend isn't fascism or extremism for some reason. Sangita, Myska, thank you so much for coming on and sort of telling us about your experience on Saturday, which I have to say sounds very scary. So I'm very, well done for attending, and lots of very positive comments in the YouTube chat. So thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is under increasing pressure as questions over his judgment mount, and they've been compounded today by a sudden resignation. Paul Ovenden, Starmer's head or director of political strategy, has quit after it emerged he sent disgusting messages about then Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott in 2017. And these messages, I should warn you, really are quite disgusting. ITV News broke the story, publishing these messages sent by Ovenden to another Labour staffer on the party's internal messaging system. This is from 2017. Again, I'll warn you, this is all rather disgusting. So Paul Ovenden says, I have got something that will make you lol from last night. We were playing Shag, Marry, Kill at PT. Don't know what that is. Honestly, I nearly wet myself laughing. And then the other person says, what? I love that game. And then Paul Ovenden says, someone asking someone who would use the strap-on out of her and Diane Abbott was the highlight, low light. And then someone's physical demonstration of someone putting it on was amazing. What are you doing? It's so big. It has shoulder straps. And then the other person says, haha, that's amazing. What was the answer? Some awful mental picture assembling in my head. And then Paul Ovenden says, we spent a lot of time, sorry about this, discussing going down on Diane. Honestly, it was outrageous. Oh my God. Let's go to the statement from Ovenden. He says, I am accused of 8 years ago, as a junior press officer, sharing with a female colleague the details of a silly conversation that I was party to with other female staff members. Before summer, I had announced to some of my colleagues my intention to leave the government, though the messages long predated my current employment and relationship with the Prime Minister. I've brought forward my resignation to avoid distracting from the vital work this government is doing to positively change people's lives. He says, as an advisor, my duty is to protect the reputation of the Prime Minister and his government. While it is chilling that a private conversation from nearly a decade ago can do this sort of damage, I am also truly, deeply sorry for it and the hurt it will cause. He doesn't really sound that sorry, does he? If he's saying, I was going to resign anyway, but I'm doing it now because otherwise, it's bad press for Keir Starmer, and I'm a press officer, of course. And yeah, it's chilling that this ever got leaked, but, I'm sorry for the hurt the leak will cause, essentially. It seems to be what he's saying. He was a press officer at the time, junior press officer. A Downing Street spokesperson has described Ovenden's messages as, quote, appalling and unacceptable, adding that, quote, these kinds of comments have no place in our politics. No place in our politics? That's not so clear. After Mish Rahman, a former member of Labour's National Executive Committee, posted this online. So he says, I was aware about this during the general election campaign. I even provided the following quote to BBC Newsnight. In the end, they and Channel 4 News refused to publish. It's clear the gloves are off now, and instead of protecting Starmer, as they did before, his time is done. So then he's included this quote that he sent to BBC and Channel 4 at the time. So he says, these comments are vile and grotesque. They're as appalling as Frank Hester's remarks, and to think the person who made them is one of Starmer's closest advisors on Labour's payroll makes me sick. These are the kind of racist and sexist attitudes in Starmer's top team that have led to the targeting of women of colour on the left of the party. If the reaction of other Labour aides is anything to go by, Rahman may be onto something about the attitudes of people in Starmer's top team. So the Guardian's deputy political editor, Jessica Elgott, posted this. Whatever you think of these messages, the reality is this story and Paul Ovenden's subsequent resignation has provoked pure, unadulterated fury from long-serving Labour aides, many saying they do not believe Starmer should have accepted his resignation. So Starmer should have essentially said, I don't care if you want to resign. There was nothing wrong with those messages you sent 8 years ago, and so you should stay in the job. Starmer did give him the job, and as it seems like this, he probably should have known that these kind of emails existed, but he has accepted the resignation. As we'll see, Starmer tends to ask people to resign once the things they've done have been found out and become a press story rather than when he should have known. Mish Rahman isn't the only person to say the Ovenden messages were an open secret. So former Labour Investigations and Governance Officer Halima Khan said this. So she was on that Al Jazeera documentary, wasn't she? My unit investigated Paul Ovenden in 2020, and as a key figure in Labour's BAME staff network, we pushed for the Ford report into these allegations. Starmer and the media were fully aware of these messages. The green light on these briefings is set up from inside Labour HQ. The green light on these briefings is a setup from inside Labour HQ. So I suppose she's saying that this is now being published because they want it to be published. There is something to that in terms of why it was leaked today, because the origin of this story is interesting. So my understanding is it was given to ITV by Paul Holden, who has an upcoming book about Starmer, which could potentially be explosive. This was the story he gave to ITV in the run-up to that book being published. Apparently, ITV went to number 10 for a right of reply last night, but before ITV published it, the news broke in the Daily Mail. So presumably leaked preemptively by Downing Street, although I imagine they didn't actually want this story to get published. I was told by Paul Holden that he thought maybe there were some issues last year with sort of completely making it verified that these were genuine, and they did a bit of data analysis to prove that they were, and so that's one of the reasons why it's coming out now when it didn't back then. But if this was in circulation, in 2024, but they just couldn't quite prove it was him. You can guess that Starmer knew that this kind of thing was circling around this person. Harriet Williamson, sorry for coming to you so late. Thank you for being so patient. We've just had some fabulous guests on the first half of the show. What do you make of this story? I mean, obviously it's going to be bloody horrible for Diane Abbott being back in the news again for such a sort of disgusting reason. But what are your comments on this?
Thanks for having me, Michael. I think that this story is just proof of the absolute poison at the heart of sensible centrism and at the heart of the Labour Party machine. So Ovenden says that his comments were made 8 years ago. That was 2017. That's when Abbott was serving as the Shadow Home Secretary under Jeremy Corbyn's Labour government. And we know from the Ford report in 2022, there was lots of really unpleasant, misogynistic and racist bullying directed at Diane Abbott by senior Labour Party staffers. If this was an open secret and Starmer knew about it and it's only being leaked now, this is about, as you said before, gloves being off. Maybe this is paving the way for a big leadership contest and it being Starmer's time to go. But what I'd really like to draw attention to in this story is the utter disdain centrists in Labour have for Diane Abbott and this desire they seem to feel to denigrate and humiliate her in a really disturbing sexual way. Now, if you wanted to feel more cross about this story, Ovenden was getting a six-figure salary by the time he decided to resign today, between £115,000 and £120,000, according to ITV. But there's another thing I want to highlight here, Michael, if you'll just permit me to tell a story here. In May last year, I went to a taping of the TV show Have I Got News For You? It was hosted, that particular episode, by Victoria Coren Mitchell, and it also featured Sky's Sophie Ridge. And this was around the time that there was a lot in the news about whether Diane Abbott would be allowed to stand as a Labour Party candidate in the upcoming 2024 general election. And the main joke for that episode of Have I Got News For You in the taping, I don't know how much of it made the cut that was shown on BBC because I didn't bother to watch it. The main joke was about making fun of Diane Abbott for having a relationship with Jeremy Corbyn back in the 70s. And it all revolved around how disgusting the idea of Diane Abbott having any sort of sexual activity, and Jeremy Corbyn also, was. And it was a bunch of liberal elites sitting around a table making fun of the most abused woman in politics and the longest serving black MP, who is now Mother of the House. And it gave absolute bully vibes. And I think that's what we've seen here today as well.
Clearly, I mean, the conversations they were having in 2017 were absolute bullying. I mean, from the Labour leaks, which we sort of covered at the time, not in 2017, when they were sort of revealed in 2020, there was sort of lots of them sort of bragging when Diane Abbott had gone to cry in the toilet. It was all really, really horrible stuff. I think the Ford, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but in the Ford report, he said sort of that a disdain and sort of words of disgust shown towards Diane Abbott had a clear racial inflection, something along those lines. Let's talk about Keir Starmer's judgment here, because again, this is a story about who he decided to hire, even though we assume, or people are suggesting, this was an open secret to some degree. And again, his judgment, this story couldn't have come at a worse time. Last week, he was forced to sack British Ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson. That is, of course, the same ambassador that Starmer himself appointed to the role, despite Mandelson's known connections to convicted paedophile and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. And after more details of that relationship predictably came to light, including the fact that Mandelson sent Epstein messages of support after he was jailed in 2008 for soliciting sex from girls as young as 14, Mandelson had to go. But questions remain around Starmer's judgment, as well as how much he knew about the extent of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. Starmer has now spoken out, and he's tried to address some of those questions.
Let me talk this through with you, because it's important to appreciate what happened when, and I understand that. Obviously, the diplomatic post of American ambassador, really important post, and Peter Mandelson, before he was appointed, went through a due diligence process. That's the propriety and ethics team, went through a process, and therefore I knew of his association with Epstein, but had I known then what I know now, I'd have never appointed him. Because what emerged last week were emails, Bloomberg emails, which showed that the nature and extent of the relationship that Peter Mandelson had with Epstein was far different to what I had understood to be the position when I appointed him. On top of that, what the email showed was he was not only questioning, but wanting to challenge the conviction of Epstein at the time. That, for me, went and cut across the whole approach that I've taken on violence against women and girls for many years, and this government's approach. On top of that, what emerged last week, on Wednesday evening late, were Peter Mandelson's responses to questions that have been put to him by government officials. I looked at those responses and I did not find them at all satisfying.
I don't think many people are going to find his answers particularly satisfying. He was pressed on the details of that account.
From what we can work out, details were furnished to bits of the Whitehall machinery, the Foreign Office and Downing Street, quite a bit ahead of you defending Peterman on Wednesday at Prime Minister's questions. And people are scratching their heads saying, why didn't you, the Prime Minister, make more effort to make sure you were briefed on this? Were people briefing you properly? Were they acting on your behalf? Were they acting slightly on Peter Mandelson's behalf, maybe? Bits of the machine.
Well, let me deal with that, because it was only on Wednesday early evening that I knew the contents of the Bloomberg emails. It was only very late on Wednesday when Peter Mandelson replied to the questions that had been put to him by government officials. And it was on that basis that I took my decision that he should be removed. What I knew before PMQs was that there had been media inquiries. I didn't know the content of the Bloomberg emails. And I knew that questions had been put to Peter that he had not yet answered. And he hadn't answered them by the time it got to PMQs. There is, of course, a time lag in America, but I knew that there are questions that have been put to him, but I didn't know what answers he was going to give to those questions. That came later on Wednesday. And that's why, at that point, I gave the answer I did at PMQs, and that's the extent of what I knew at the time.
I knew he was close to a paedophile, but not quite as close as I then came to realise. Like, what the hell? What are you talking about? This is nonsense. Science Minister Peter Carl appeared on Trevor Phillips' show on Sunday, and he gave an account that suggests there were conflicting interests at play.
We're expected to believe that nobody knew about this relationship or the depth of this relationship.
We knew that it was a strong relationship. We knew all of the public information. But Peter Mandelson has done...
the vetting is meant to go behind the public information, isn't it? Or doesn't it?
Well, no, it goes to everything that is within reach. And the information that has come to light was not in reach. The Prime Minister, as soon as the new information came... Look, the heart of the issue, and I understand what it is that he had a relationship with Epstein that was known about publicly. And was that enough to actually prevent him from having the job in the first place? When you are dealing with the matters between two governments and you are trying to get a talent which is singular to put to the bear on behalf of our country, which has been proven to be delivering for our country, these are decisions that the Prime Minister made. We knew that there were risks involved, but also his talent led us to believe at the time that the risk was worth it.
So you've got quite different explanations, haven't you? Keir Starmer saying, I knew, but I didn't know the full extent. And then Peter Carl saying, we knew, but we thought because he's smart, it's worth it anyway. Like, it's not very... It doesn't speak very well of Britain if we can't find anyone who would be a talented American ambassador who wasn't best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. Right? We're a big country. There's 60 odd million of us. Like, I'm sure there are many smart professional people who could form a relationship with people in Washington who wasn't best mates with Jeffrey Epstein. We already knew that Epstein called him Petey. We knew that they were very good friends, right? The idea that sort of we had to go with the Epstein guy because there was absolutely no one else. Carl was also asked about Starmer's judgment and gave an answer that has not aged well.
He backed and sacked Louise Haigh. He backed and sacked Rushanara Ali and Tulip Siddiq, or they stood down. He backed and sacked Angela Rayner and now Peter Mandelson. How many cases is it going to take before at least somebody asks the question, is there something wrong, either about the Prime Minister's judgment or the machine he has around him?
When you've got a government which has over 120 ministers in it, you are going to have people that come and go from time to time, and you are going to have people who don't live up to the standards that we expect. Now, let me make this point. Keir Starmer raised the bar for standards in public life.
He raised the bar for standards in public life by deciding that even though he was friends with paedophile, he's probably the best. It's good, we'll allow that because he's especially talented. And now you've got, his chief presser, I don't even know what his bloody job was, but Paul Ovenden, who was already in the Labour leaks, by the way, and now it's been revealed, had this horrible, I don't want to, you've heard it at the beginning of the segment, I don't want to repeat exactly what he wrote in the email again, that he was very close to. Like, this is clearly an administration that really doesn't care about standards. I mean, that's why they go and brown-nose Donald Trump. Like, they have decided, I said this last week, but they have decided, I think, that principles are a sign of political immaturity. And they've decided that what grown-ups do is they say, I don't really care about your ethics or your morals or your principles. If I think you'll be effective, then I'll hire you. And then, oh, by the way, it's the most ineffective government we've had in decades. Maybe Liz Truss was worse, but this is a competition that you don't really want to be fighting. If none of this has convinced you that Starmer's days might be numbered, I offer you one more piece of evidence, which I think is the knockout blow. It's from a Telegraph story from today. 2 Labour MPs questioned the Prime Minister's defence of Epstein. One said, quote, "The buck stops at the top. If the Prime Minister knew about the emails but wasn't briefed, he should have asked questions in detail. It would be better now to stop searching for a scapegoat, admit he got it wrong, and seek to move on." Another said, "It really does seem like death by 1,000 cuts. There's an open sore and people are picking it. It's a case of amputate quick or cauterize, and if that means Morgan, presumably McSweeney, has to go, so be it. But then this is the kicker. At the moment, it is only Keir Starmer's force of personality that is keeping this government together." Jesus Christ. It's only this shit that's making my kitchen from smelling bad. It's the idea that Keir Starmer's force of personality is the best thing this government has got is insane. Harriet, do you think his days are numbered? It's kind of already feeling like that is becoming somewhat inevitable.
Yeah, I think they definitely are. And what I would say, Michael, is that phase 2 is obviously going really well. Starmer is failing to deliver material change for the people of this country. He's opening the door wide for a reform government at the next election, with his clinging on to this failed economic model and vacuous growth agenda, which is materially meaningless for the majority of people. He's had 5 ministers booted or resigned just over a year of Labour being in power. The one who wasn't mentioned was Andrew Gwynn. Obviously, we've got Rayner, Sadiq, Rushanara Ali, and Louise Haigh. It's all looking a little bit Tory sleaze. And then he goes and hires a friend of probably one of the most famous paedophiles in the world. And this is somebody who defended Jeffrey Epstein after his first conviction for soliciting a child for sexual purposes back in 2008. Peter Kyle sort of said the quiet part out loud in his interview. He said, we thought the calculation was worth it. It's an empty suit response, just like his Unite the Kingdom one, but it just shows exactly what the sort of calculations that this Labour government is happy to make. They thought they could use somebody like Mandelson. Mandelson has been dogged by scandal since his secret loan that he took from Geoffrey Robinson in the 90s. I was still in primary school at this point. Mandelson does not have a clean slate. His ties to Epstein should have precluded him from having that ambassador job in the first place. But it was almost like they were Starmer and his aides, whoever's advising him, Morgan McSweeney et al., they were dazzled by him being this Labour grandee and, knowing people in common with Donald Trump. Well, one of those people is a convicted, now deceased paedophile. Maybe he should have rethought that. Starmer's response has been embarrassing, spineless, all this splitting hairs about when he knew what. Well, he should have known. But the real question is, why is it coming out now? And it's coming out now because Starmer's days are numbered. They realise that he's a lame duck Prime Minister. No one likes him. He's absolutely tanking in popularity. And we're looking at Nigel Farage stepping into Downing Street in a couple of years' time, really.
Well, I mean, I suppose the Epstein thing kind of came out because of Congress. But yeah, I mean, definitely, we are at this point where more and more of this stuff is going to come out because the media like to sort of kick someone when they're down, when they smell blood. They go for them. They're less interested in access. So if they think someone's on the way up, they don't necessarily want to sort of release all of the dirt they might have, because then they'll lose access. If they think that sort of they're on the way down, now's the time to say, let's use all of our stuff before we lose the opportunity and it becomes irrelevant. We did have a couple more stories, but we're going to wrap up there because otherwise we'll just go way, way over. And that first section was a bit meatier than we were expecting. So Harriet, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Again, apologies that you didn't get as much airtime as we were expecting. We'll get you back on soon and correct that.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for having me and my autumnal pumpkin jumper with these two rather demonic-looking kittens on the front.
It's gorgeous. I love that. You know, you have to tell me where you go shopping. My black t-shirt feels rather dull in comparison. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.